One of the most pivotal shifts a leader can make in the journey toward becoming a developmental coach is the movement from telling to asking, from offering answers to inviting discovery, from guiding through instruction to guiding through inquiry. And although this may sound subtle, in practice it demands a fundamental transformation in how we understand our role, our responsibility, and our relationship to those we lead. Most leaders rise to their positions because of their capacity to solve problems, to offer clarity, to make decisions. And understandably, they are often looked to for answers. So when someone comes with a challenge, a stuck project, a conflict with a colleague, an unclear path, the impulse to provide guidance can feel not only natural, but even helpful. But here's the paradox. What helps in the short term often hinders in the long term. Because while advice may solve a problem, it does not develop the person. Advice can be useful, even necessary in crisis or time-sensitive contexts, but when it becomes a default response, it disempowers. It teaches people to look up instead of looking within. It encourages dependency rather than growth. What makes questions so powerful is not just their philosophical appeal, but their neurological impact. When we pose a thoughtful question, we activate different neural pathways than when we simply absorb information. The brain engages in a process called active retrieval, where it must search its networks for relevant connections, experiences, and insights. This cognitive work strengthens mental pathways and creates deeper learning than passive reception ever could. Research in neuroscience shows that this retrieval process actually forms stronger memory traces and more durable understanding. In other words, when people discover answers through their own thinking, those insights literally become wired into their brains in ways that externally provided answers do not. This is why the development that comes through coaching questions tends to be more lasting and transferable than development that comes through instruction alone. Questions, by contrast, do something radically different. They awaken. They transfer ownership of thinking back to the person facing the challenge. They signal trust, not in the leader's expertise, but in the other's capacity to reflect, to reason, to choose. A well-placed question can change the entire trajectory of a conversation. Instead of saying, "Here's what I would do," you might ask, "What options have you considered?" Instead of saying, "This is how you should handle it," you might ask, "What outcome do you really want, and what's getting in the way?" These questions do not close the path, they open it. They do not insert your map into the other person's journey. They help the person draw their own. And this is not a soft or passive approach. It is, in fact, a more demanding one, because it invites the other person to think, to wrestle, to step into their own agency. And that process is what actually leads to development. It helps people build confidence, clarity, and capacity not because they were told what to do, but because they discovered what to do. Not all questions are created equal, however. The developmental power of inquiry depends greatly on the types of questions asked and the sequence in which they unfold. A masterful coaching leader understands how to progressively deepen thinking through carefully structured questioning patterns. Often, this begins with awareness questions that help the person recognize their current reality, what's happening now, or what are you noticing about the situation? From there, the coach might move to meaning-making questions. What's important about this to you? Or how does this connect to your larger goals? Only then might they transition to action-oriented questions. What possibilities do you see? Or what's one step you could take forward? This sequencing matters because it honors the natural flow of human development. We must first see clearly where we are before we can meaningfully decide where to go. Questions that rush to action before building awareness often lead to superficial solutions that don't address underlying patterns. The developmental coach recognizes this and patiently guides the questioning process from seeing to understanding to choosing. Through this progressive inquiry, people develop not just better answers, but better thinking processes that serve them far beyond the immediate conversation. Coaching through questions also builds something deeper than skill. It builds a sense of dignity. When we ask rather than tell, we communicate. I respect your intelligence. I believe you are capable. I am not here to direct your every move, but to support your growth. That experience of being seen and trusted in this way often becomes a turning point in someone's professional identity. They stop seeing themselves as executors and start seeing themselves as leaders of their own thinking. That shift is not something you can command. It must be evoked. And questions are how we evoke. Perhaps the greatest challenge in this transition from telling to asking lies not in the technical skill of questioning, but in the leader's relationship with their own expertise. Most leaders have spent careers building knowledge, refining judgment, and honing their ability to see the right path forward. To step back from that position of knowing requires genuine courage. It means being willing to enter conversations without predetermined outcomes. It means trusting that the collective intelligence that emerges through dialogue might surpass even your own best thinking. It means embracing the vulnerability of genuinely not knowing where a conversation might lead. This stance of learn not knowing represents the highest evolution of leadership wisdom. It is the recognition that our greatest value often lies not in what we can provide, but in what we can evoke. The developmental coach understands that their expertise now serves a different purpose, not to direct outcomes, but to create the conditions in which others' thinking can flourish. This relinquishing of control, paradoxically, often leads to more innovative solutions and more sustainable growth than directive leadership ever could. It transforms the relationship from one of dependency to one of partnership in service of shared goals and ongoing development. This is why the most powerful coaching conversations are built less on what the leader knows and more on what the leader is willing to ask and willing to hold space for as the answers emerge. If coaching is to become an integral part of leadership, then it cannot remain a technique applied on occasion like a tool taken out of a box. It must become a way of being, a mindset, a posture, a fundamental stance toward other human beings. And at the heart of this coaching mindset lie three profound commitments: curiosity, trust, and belief in human potential. Let us begin with curiosity, because without it, no coaching conversation can be anything more than a disguised directive. Curiosity is the willingness to not know. It is the discipline of resisting the urge to judge, to assume, to fix. It is what allows us to enter a conversation not as experts dispensing wisdom, but as partners in exploration. When a leader brings genuine curiosity into a conversation, the atmosphere changes. The other person senses that they are not being evaluated or diagnosed, but invited to reflect, to think, to see more clearly. Curiosity is disarming because it asks rather than demands. It evokes insight rather than imposes it. It creates a space in which the other can access parts of their own intelligence that remain hidden under pressure or passivity. But curiosity alone is not enough. It must be grounded in trust, not just interpersonal trust, though that is crucial, but a deeper trust in the process of development itself. A leader with a coaching mindset trusts that growth is possible even when it is slow, that clarity will emerge even when the answers are not immediately apparent, that people will rise if given the chance to stretch. This kind of trust is not naive. It does not mean letting go of accountability or lowering standards. In fact, it means raising them, but doing so in a way that believes in people's capacity to meet those standards through ownership rather than fear. When we trust others, we stop trying to control them. And paradoxically, it is often in the absence of control that the most powerful growth occurs. Patience emerges as a critical virtue in this process. The developmental journey rarely follows a linear path or a convenient timeline. Breakthroughs often come after periods of apparent stagnation. The coaching leader understands this rhythm and creates space for it. They resist the organizational pull toward immediate results and quick fixes, recognizing that sustainable development requires time for integration, reflection, and even occasional regression. This patience is not passive waiting but active holding, maintaining the developmental container even when progress seems slow. It is the willingness to stand in uncertainty without rushing to resolution, trusting that something important is happening beneath the surface, even when it remains invisible. Finally, the coaching mindset is rooted in a radical belief in human potential, not as an abstract slogan, but as a lived conviction. It is the belief that the person in front of you is not a problem to be solved, not a resource to be optimized, but a living, learning being who can grow beyond their current form. This belief changes everything. It changes how you speak, how you listen, how you respond to mistakes. It makes you slower to judge and quicker to encourage. It helps you see beyond surface behaviors into the deeper structures of motivation, aspiration, and possibility. And perhaps most importantly, this belief is contagious. When a leader consistently treats someone as capable of more, they often become capable of more. When we hold people in the light of their potential rather than the shadow of their shortcomings, we call forth something dormant within them. We awaken their agency, their confidence, their willingness to step into new capacities. This view of potential transforms how we understand performance challenges. When faced with someone who is struggling, the coaching leader does not ask, "What's wrong with them?" but rather, "What's happening that's blocking their natural capacity?" This shift moves us from a deficit based approach to a resource based one. Instead of focusing exclusively on what's missing or broken, we inquire into what strengths remain untapped, what motivations lie dormant, what perspectives might be limited but expandable. This doesn't mean ignoring real performance issues. Rather, it means approaching them with a fundamentally different orientation. It means assuming capability first, and then working to understand and address the internal or external barriers that are preventing that capability from fully manifesting. The coaching mindset requires a profound understanding of the difference between development and instruction. Development is not simply the accumulation of new skills or information. It is a qualitative transformation in how someone makes sense of their world, their work, and themselves. It involves shifts in perspective, expansions of identity, and evolutions in how one constructs meaning from experience. The coaching leader recognizes these deeper developmental processes and creates conditions for them to unfold. They understand that meaningful growth often requires disruption of existing mental models before new ones can emerge. They become skilled at recognizing developmental readiness, the moments when someone is primed for a particular kind of challenge that will stretch, but not overwhelm their current meaning-making system. The coaching mindset is not soft. It is not permissive. It is rigorously respectful. It demands discipline, the discipline to listen more than speak, to ask more than answer, to believe more than doubt. It is not for the impatient or the insecure. But for those willing to embody it, this mindset becomes not only a source of transformation for others, but a constant source of growth for the leader themselves. Because every time we coach well, we practice presence. We practice humility. We practice trust in the unfolding process of human development. And in doing so, we ourselves are shaped. Now that we've uncovered the mindset required for coaching, we turn to the anatomy of the coaching conversation itself, not as a rigid formula, but as a fluid structure within which growth can unfold. A powerful coaching conversation is not simply a meeting or a casual check-in. It is an intentional space designed to help another person hear themselves more clearly, to unlock insight that might otherwise remain buried, to bring into the open what is often only vaguely sensed. And there are three elements that give this kind of conversation its power: clarity of intention, the use of generative questions, and the quiet courage to hold space through active listening and silence. We begin with intention because without it, even the best questions and deepest listening can wander aimlessly. A coaching conversation must begin with a clear and shared sense of purpose. What are we here to explore? What shift are we inviting? What decision, behavior, or self-awareness is ready to evolve? This clarity doesn't have to be rigid. In fact, coaching often takes us in surprising directions, but it grounds the interaction. It says to the other person, "You are not here to be managed, but to grow." And this is not just a conversation, it is an act of development. The physical and energetic container for coaching conversations deserves careful attention. Where these conversations happen matters not just the physical location, but the psychological safety of the space. A rushed conversation between meetings in a busy hallway sends a different message than one held in a quiet room with phones silenced and full attention given. The developmental coach deliberately creates environments that signal the importance of this time together. This might mean leaving the office entirely, taking a walking meeting in nature, or simply ensuring privacy and freedom from interruption. The setup communicates what we believe about the value of this interaction and the dignity of the person being coached. Our bodies, too, form part of this container. How we sit, our facial expressions, our degree of relaxation or tension. These nonverbal elements speak volumes about our true intentions and availability, often more honestly than our words. From this intention arises the second key element, the artful use of open, generative questions. These are not questions that seek to elicit quick answers or confirm our own assumptions. They are questions that slow people down, that open reflection, that invite the other to think more deeply than they have before. A good coaching question does not lead, it liberates. It might sound simple. What are you noticing right now? What matters most to you in this situation? Where are you feeling stuck, and what might that reveal? The power of these questions lies not in their complexity, but in their sincerity. They are not meant to impress. They are meant to reveal. And when they are asked from presence, they often strike a deeper chord than the speaker expects. Behind every powerful question lies genuine wonder. The coach who asks from curiosity rather than strategy creates a different quality of conversation. This wonder is felt by the other person. They sense whether we are truly interested in their response or merely using questions as a technique to lead them somewhere predetermined. Questions asked from wonder invite exploration rather than performance. They create space for the unexpected, the contradictory, the not yet formed thought to emerge. They allow for the messy reality of human thinking rather than forcing artificial clarity too soon. This authenticity matters because development happens not when people give us the answers they think we want, but when they discover truths they didn't know they knew. The coach's own comfort with ambiguity and uncertainty becomes a crucial element in allowing this exploration to unfold without premature closure. The third and perhaps most challenging element is listening, not just casual listening, but spacious, active, fully embodied listening. This means not rushing to respond, not interrupting with solutions, not rescuing the silence with noise. It means letting the conversation breathe. It means allowing the other person to sit with their own insights, to find their own language, to notice their own patterns. It is in these quiet spaces that the real growth often occurs, not when the leader speaks, but when they wait. When they resist the urge to teach and instead let the other discover. Coaching is not a performance. It is a relational space in which something new can emerge. And this space only becomes possible when we are willing to listen without needing to fix, when we are willing to stay with discomfort rather than alleviate it too quickly. The developmental power of coaching conversations often lies in their capacity to make the invisible visible, to bring to awareness the mental models, assumptions, and beliefs that shape our perceptions but typically operate below conscious awareness. When someone says, "I can't possibly have that conversation with my colleague," the coach hears not just a statement of impossibility, but an invitation to explore what makes it seem impossible. What assumptions about conflict, about professional relationships, about one's own capability are embedded in that can't? By gently surfacing these underlying structures of thought, the coach helps the other person recognize choices they couldn't see before. This is not about persuading or convincing, but about illuminating, shining light on the cognitive architecture that constrains or enables action. As these limiting patterns become conscious, they become available for examination and, potentially, for transformation. The most profound coaching conversations create what developmental psychologists call constructive developmental disequilibrium, a state where existing ways of making sense of the world become insufficient, creating an opening for new, more complex meaning-making to emerge. This disequilibrium isn't comfortable. It often involves confronting contradictions in one's thinking or recognizing the limitations of previously adequate frameworks. The skilled coach knows how to create just enough challenge to invite growth without overwhelming the other's capacity to integrate new perspectives. This balance, providing both support and challenge, lies at the heart of developmental coaching. Too much challenge without adequate support creates anxiety and defensiveness. Too much support without challenge leads to stagnation. Finding this edge requires attunement to the other's current developmental capacity and readiness for growth. Intention, questioning, listening, these are not isolated skills. They are interwoven. They feed one another. And when practiced together, they create a space where people begin to see themselves not through the lens of judgment, but through the lens of possibility. That is what a coaching conversation truly is, not a technique, but a moment of transformation in which a person becomes more conscious of who they are, what they want, and who they might yet become. One of the most pivotal shifts a leader can make in the journey toward becoming a developmental coach is the movement from telling to asking, from offering answers to inviting discovery, from guiding through instruction to guiding through inquiry. And although this may sound subtle, in practice it demands a fundamental transformation in how we understand our role, our responsibility, and our relationship to those we lead. Most leaders rise to their positions because of their capacity to solve problems, to offer clarity, to make decisions. And understandably, they are often looked to for answers. So when someone comes with a challenge, a stuck project, a conflict with a colleague, an unclear path, the impulse to provide guidance can feel not only natural, but even helpful. But here is the paradox. What helps in the short term often hinders in the long term. Because while advice may solve a problem, it does not develop the person. Advice can be useful, even necessary in crisis or time-sensitive contexts, but when it becomes a default response, it disempowers. It teaches people to look up instead of looking within. It encourages dependency rather than growth. This transition from telling to asking requires not just new skills, but a fundamental identity shift for many leaders. It means redefining what it means to add value. In a traditional leadership paradigm, value comes from having answers, from steering the ship, from being the source of wisdom. In a developmental coaching paradigm, value comes from creating conditions where others can access their own wisdom, navigate their own challenges, and strengthen their own decision-making muscles. This identity shift can be profoundly disorienting at first. Leaders may wonder, if I'm not providing solutions, what exactly am I contributing? If I'm not directing the conversation, how do I ensure we get somewhere valuable? These questions reflect the growing pains that come with evolving leadership identity. The developmental coach must learn to find satisfaction not in being right or indispensable, but in witnessing the growth and expanding capability of others. Questions, by contrast, do something radically different. They awaken. They transfer ownership of thinking back to the person facing the challenge. They signal trust, not in the leader's expertise, but in the other's capacity to reflect, to reason, to choose. A well-placed question can change the entire trajectory of a conversation. Instead of saying, "Here's what I would do," you might ask, "What options have you considered?" Instead of saying, "This is how you should handle it," you might ask, "What outcome do you really want, and what's getting in the way?" These questions do not close the path, they open it. They do not insert your map into the other person's journey, they help the person draw their own. And this is not a soft or passive approach. It is, in fact, a more demanding one, because it invites the other person to think, to wrestle, to step into their own agency. And that process is what actually leads to development. It helps people build confidence, clarity, and capacity not because they were told what to do, but because they discovered what to do. The power of questions extends beyond individual development to shape the broader culture of the organization. When leaders consistently ask rather than tell, they model a way of engaging that ripples outward. Teams begin to adopt more curious, exploratory approaches to problem solving. Meetings shift from status reports to generative discussions. People at all levels become more comfortable with not knowing immediately, with staying in questions long enough for deeper insights to emerge. This cultural shift represents a profound competitive advantage in complex environments that require innovation, adaptation, and collective intelligence. Organizations where people habitually defer to authority for answers simply cannot match the responsiveness and creativity of those where questions flow freely in all directions, where the collective intelligence of the system is activated through inquiry rather than dampened through deference. The developmental coach understands that different types of questions serve different purposes at different moments. There are questions that open awareness. What are you noticing about the situation that others might miss? There are questions that deepen analysis. What patterns do you see emerging across these incidents? There are questions that surface values and purpose. What matters most to you and how this unfolds? And there are questions that invite commitment and action. Given everything we've explored, what's one step you're ready to take? The masterful coach develops sensitivity to when each type of question will be most generative, always seeking to match the question to the developmental moment at hand. This requires keen attention to the subtle cues, verbal and nonverbal, that signal where the other person might be ready to go deeper, where they might be avoiding something important, or where they might be prepared for a breakthrough. Coaching through questions also builds something deeper than skill. It builds a sense of dignity. When we ask rather than tell, we communicate. I respect your intelligence. I believe you are capable. I am not here to direct your every move, but to support your growth. That experience of being seen and trusted in this way often becomes a turning point in someone's professional identity. They stop seeing themselves as executors and start seeing themselves as leaders of their own thinking. That shift is not something you can command. It must be evoked. And questions are how we evoke. This is why the most powerful coaching conversations are built less on what the leader knows and more on what the leader is willing to ask and willing to hold space for as the answers emerge. This developmental approach stands in stark contrast to the traditional performance management paradigm that still dominates many organizations. In that paradigm, the focus remains on external evaluation, on identifying and fixing deficiencies, on measuring people against standardized expectations. The developmental coach works from a fundamentally different set of assumptions. Rather than seeing people primarily through the lens of current performance, they see them through the lens of potential capacity. Rather than focusing on what's wrong, they inquire into what's possible. This doesn't mean ignoring performance issues or accountability, quite the contrary. It means addressing these issues in a way that simultaneously strengthens the person's ability to self-correct, to learn from experience, to develop greater self-awareness and self-regulation. The developmental coach believes that sustainable performance improvement comes not from external pressure, but from internal growth. The essence of this developmental shift lies in the recognition that the most valuable thing we can develop in others is not compliance with our directions, but capacity for independent thought. In a world of increasing complexity and rapid change, organizations need people at all levels who can think for themselves, who can navigate ambiguity, who can adapt to emerging circumstances without constant guidance from above. By replacing habitual telling with thoughtful asking, leaders cultivate exactly these capacities. They help people develop not just technical skills, but adaptive capabilities, the meta skills of learning, discernment, and wise action. And in doing so, they create not just higher performance, but more sustainable, resilient, and innovative organizations where human potential can truly flourish. This is the promise of the developmental coaching approach. Not just better results, but better ways of achieving those results, ways that honor and expand human capacity rather than constraining it. While the coaching approach is immensely powerful, it is not a universal solution to every leadership situation, and part of becoming a wise, growth-oriented leader is learning to discern when coaching is appropriate and when it is not. Coaching is not a replacement for direction, structure, or accountability. Rather, it is a complementary mode of leadership, one that works best under the right conditions. And so we must first understand, coaching is fundamentally developmental. It is a long-term investment in another person's thinking, autonomy, and self-awareness. It is not designed for moments of acute crisis, when clarity and decisiveness are required to move forward. When a team is facing an urgent deadline, when safety is at risk, or when a new employee is still learning the basics of their role, it may be both inefficient and unkind to ask a dozen reflective questions when what is truly needed is clarity, structure, or decisive leadership. Coaching is most effective not when people are disoriented, but when they are ready to grow, when they are facing a meaningful challenge, when they are stuck not because of a lack of information, but because of a lack of insight, when the development of their thinking is more important than the speed of their execution. In these moments, coaching becomes a force multiplier. It helps people take ownership of their next step not because someone told them what to do, but because they saw it for themselves. The dynamic between coaching and organizational culture requires careful attention as well. In environments where trust is low, where psychological safety has not been established, or where mistakes are routinely punished, coaching interventions may be received with suspicion rather than openness. People might interpret questions as tests or traps rather than invitations to think more deeply. They might provide answers they believe the leader wants to hear rather than engaging in genuine exploration. This is why developmental coaching cannot be separated from the broader work of creating a learning culture, one where curiosity is valued over certainty, where exploration is encouraged over quick fixes, where growth is prioritized over blame. The coaching leader recognizes that their effectiveness depends not just on their individual skill, but on the relational and cultural context in which that skill is applied. They work simultaneously on two levels, developing individuals through coaching conversations while also shaping the environment that makes those conversations possible. The integration of coaching into leadership ultimately represents a profound shift in how we understand organizational effectiveness and human development. It moves us beyond the false dichotomy between people-centered and results-centered approaches, recognizing that the deepest and most sustainable results come through developing people's capacity to think clearly, collaborate effectively, and act with wisdom. It challenges the dominant paradigm of leadership as control, offering instead a vision of leadership as liberation, the liberation of human potential, creativity, and agency. In a world of increasing complexity, where yesterday's solutions quickly become obsolete and where the pace of change outstrips our ability to predict or plan, this developmental approach becomes not just a nice-to-have, but an essential strategy for organizational adaptation and resilience. The leaders and organizations that thrive will be those that have invested not just in specific skills or technologies, but in the fundamental human capacity to learn, to grow, and to respond wisely to emerging challenges.